T-Mobile has started beta testing the Starlink direct-to-cell. People in the US or in zones with no cellular reception is using Starlink to connect their phones to send messages. Europe announced their plan for their Starlink. So by 2029, they're going to have about 300 satellites, over $11 billion. Not commercially competitive, let's say. A lot of the technologies developed by NASA for exploring other planets are used for disaster recovery. So in a similar situation, you want like robots to be able to go into a collapsed building, for example, to be able to see if there's anybody who needs help. Space Force's budget is bigger than NASA's now. They're going to be ordering a lot of satellites.
Oh, that'd be crazy.
Oh, well, we have factories in space.
I got my insulin from a crystal made in space.
Space, the final frontier.
What's new with space?
Two things of note. One is T-Mobile has started beta testing the Starlink direct-to-cell.
Okay.
So people in the US who are in zones with no cellular reception is using Starlink to connect their phones to send messages. That's new. And the other big thing is Europe announced their plan for their Starlink. So by 2029, they're going to have about 300 satellites.
Oh.
It's an $11 billion plan, over $11 billion. It's going to come out to a couple of million per satellite. Not commercially competitive, let's say.
No.
At those prices. And obviously the constellation is going to be a lot smaller than Starlink or the constellations by competitors and by the Chinese versions. And then the other comment that everybody's talking about is what are they going to launch on? Because Europe is famously deficient of launches right now.
So is this another example of Europe's differentiated approach to technological progress?
That's a very hilarious way of putting it. Yeah. So they've lately been trying to copy the model of the US. So starting to try to introduce some competition from private startups in Europe as well. RFA, Rocket Factory Augsburg, is one of the promising ones. There's one out of Spain as well. They're trying to match the startup environment of the US. The problem here, I think, is that they're trying to match it where the US is a while ago. And so they're planning to catch up to where the Falcon 9 is. And so they're going to get there in like the next couple of years, maybe end of the decade. The problem is the end of the decade is going to be a different world, especially with something like the SpaceX Starship out there.
I guess Starship.
Yeah.
But also isn't Rocket Lab making a competitor now to the Falcon 9?
That's exactly right. So yeah, Rocket Lab, which has been performing great in the market right now, they're going to debut their Neutron next year. So that's going to be coming online soon. There's also other startups in the US. Stoke, their Nova rocket, another that one is actually fully reusable in the small to medium class. So that's also going to be very, very price competitive. And so again, those are competing in the world of a Falcon 9.
Okay.
But those are coming online in the next year or two. Europe's are going to come online in a couple of years after that. And so the environment they're going to come into is going to be a very different environment from if they had done it like a decade ago.
So then are they always going to be playing catch up?
So again, part of the problem here, you point out a very, very painful fact for Europe, is that they're very top-down initiated. So, Europe sees America do something, and then somebody in the European Commission decides.
You know what's so crazy is that the way that you describe that sounds like the way that some, more Eastern Bloc countries and even China, I think, kind of approach technology like earlier, where, I think Russia took this approach with some like computing stuff back in like the 70s or 80s, where it's like a centralized approach where, and it kind of comes from like the state, which feels like very like, I don't know, communist.
Yeah, let's call it central planning.
Yeah, central planning, right?
Yeah. So sometimes that can be a good thing. So when it requires a huge upfront investment that the commercial sector isn't ready for. So again, this is what NASA did during the space race, right? Like we had a central planning authority that would decide what needed to be built and then hand out those contracts.
Maybe the Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project is another great example where it would have been unfeasible for a private company to.
I think even COVID, the vaccine response could fall into that.
Potentially. I mean, yeah, I think that's a little bit different. That was basically just like getting out of the way of the companies more than anything else. I think there's some advantages to it. But again, like the market that we're in now is not that. And you basically like give these companies a crutch that they can't walk without, right? If you just provide too much support, too much planning.
Wait, so are any of like your friends or, do you know anybody talking about space yet? Like socially? I think I still have yet to, have anybody like approach me talking about space. I think there are definitely people online that are talking about, certain space docs, certain messaging, communities. I think there's some people on Reddit. I think there's actually a guy who we did a man on the street thing with like a month or two ago who pitched Rocket Lab as one stock to know. Yeah. Up in Central Park. I've definitely like pitched the concept to people in my circles and nobody has any idea what's going on. Like nobody's heard of the companies. Nobody knows like the technology that's going on. Nobody knows it's investable outside of SpaceX, so I'm just wondering like, when will that change?
Why is that? Yeah. Why are people not talking about it?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the time the result that you see, so think of something like, T-Mobile with Starlink, right?
Mm-hmm.
The result that you see is your phone now has reception in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not directly like visible, but that's because there's thousands of satellites orbiting a low Earth orbit that were launched with hundreds of rocket launches, which is a pace that
you need like an app on your phone that says "brought to you by."
Well, right, like exactly SpaceX or something. Yeah, I think. So I think that's like one aspect of it. But I think what I kind of see is like every once in a while something breaks through, right? So Starship being caught like that. I mean, like I don't know anybody who didn't know about that happening. It's kind of funny, but I think you're going to see like more and more of these things breaking through. So, for example, Vada with their space pharmaceuticals. At some point, maybe when somebody gets a dose of one of these things, again, it's not immediately visible. What you see is a doctor giving you an injection,
right?
But it's possible that like at some point, like that might also break through the zeitgeist, and everybody goes, "Oh, well, we have factories in space." Like they just became the thing.
I got my insulin from a crystal made in space.
Right, exactly.
The ESA, the Portuguese Space Agency, and the Portuguese Navy are using submarines to recreate the isolation and confinement challenges in space. So basically preparing people for space. Yeah,
so there's a big history of using water for simulation. So obviously NASA with astronauts, the way they do their training for zero-G and moving around like the outside, like doing EVAs, is that they just put people in a spacesuit, put them in a deep pool, and then that's how they train. And then what they'll do is they'll also block out the light. But to simulate like when you're on the shadow side of the Earth.
People have even theorized that some filming goes on in those those water tanks.
Theorizing is very generous. Yeah. And then the other thing is, so some of the challenges of space are obviously, delayed communications. And so that's what you get in a sub. In a sub. So, if we go to Mars, the delay might be anywhere between 4 and 20 minutes.
Okay.
And so, if it's on the other side of the sun, there's going to be that huge delay. And so what happens when we have explorers there something happens and we don't find out for 20 minutes, say.
And so I've heard people talk about how artificial intelligence is actually a huge solution for, some of the, for things that operate very, very far away from Earth, because there's a somewhat of a self-corrected capacity that doesn't exist with like a purely deterministic.
Yeah. AI is, better robotics and better AI is basically going to be like, there's a huge drive in space to use AI because humans are very fragile and expensive, right? And so if you have and obviously, like I was saying before, with a communication delay, if something were to happen, you kind of need the thing to like react on its own. And so there's a huge drive for better AI in robotics for space exploration. And if you think of like, one of the like most iconic space movies is also one of the most iconic AI movies, right? Like 2001: Space Odyssey. was like HAL 9000.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So those two things like have always been a little bit connected to each other.
Yeah.
And, we're probably going to imbue the machines in space, especially as we go further and further out with more intelligence and more capability to do things on their own. And, if we get, for example, there's these volcanic tubes on the moon. And if we have, when we want to explore those tubes with robotics, it'll be very, very hard to get communications there. We might just be able to figure out that technically, but the ideal situation is that you just send it and it's just able to figure out, right? And if it's got like a fork, it's just able to figure out like which direction looks more interesting.
Gotcha.
What rocks look more like geologically interesting to explore and stuff.
That is cool.
And so there's going to be like, for sure applications in terms of space exploration. And a lot of those advancements will also come back to, the robotics that we use on Earth.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of places on Earth that could be explored with the help of technology like that, like in volcanoes. Submarine, volcanoes, ocean trenches.
Yeah,
right. I think, but even like take it like at a much more basic level. So I think like a lot of people talk about money being spent in space is a waste, as if it's being spent on space. It's being spent on
right.
Earth, but talking about it being a waste. But if you think about it, it's like there's over 1 billion people who don't have any internet coverage. And if you then have something like Starlink, then you can
help a lot of people.
And then those schools can learn from the best teachers on the planet, like without needing access to better infrastructure. If you need to develop something or there's an emergency or humanitarian crisis somewhere on the planet, with these space technologies making life better, like making communication easier, you can like help improve the lives of people, especially the most needy people as well. And so I think, and another example of direct correlation too is a lot of the technologies that were used for or developed by NASA, for example, for exploring other planets are used for disaster recovery. So in a similar situation, you want like robots to be able to go into a collapsed building, for example, to be able to see if there's anybody who needs help in that building. And so a lot of that research, there's a lot of overlap. And a lot of times you're looking for the same thing. You're looking for signs of life, whether it's in a collapsed building or another planet. Yeah,
I think that's great. That would save lives and also, allows some firefighters or helpers to stay outside of a burning building that you could send a robot in.
Right, exactly. As imagine a firefighter that has absolutely no desire to save itself, right?
Yeah.
And so, on kind of the investing side, the company that's really setting the tone, with space valuations is obviously SpaceX. They just did another tender at $350 billion. That kind of, planting the flag, that's kind of now the moving target, right? How are kind of some of the other companies in the public markets kind of reacting to that? How have kind of some of the stocks that we're looking at in the space situation, how are they faring recently?
They're doing good. I think there's a bit of a breather happening right now because a lot of these stocks they went up a lot. Like some.
No, these charts looked much more like a crypto. Shitcoin than anything that like a normal stock looks like, except for Nvidia,
right.
Or maybe Tesla in 2020. But yeah, just, perfect parabola
exactly
upwards. And obviously that's unsustainable. So now I think, for Rocket Lab, it's kind of consolidating at the highs, right. Which is a great sign. Exactly. I think for people who are, holding that, and I think the same is true for, Redwire and some of these other guys as well.
What something like that helps people, I think, understand is that the market is very, very large. And I think some of the hesitation was around the fact that SpaceX is very dominant. And so is this a thing where, SpaceX is worth $350 billion because it's just so dominant in the market, or is it worth $350 billion because it's such a fast growing industry? I think it's a little bit SpaceX is very dominant, but I think it's a little bit of the latter because, for example, AST Space Mobile signed a bunch of contracts with Blue Origin, for launching their constellation because to some degree they're kind of competing directly with SpaceX. And so they don't want to be in a situation where, they're paying more per launch and then their competitor is like launching on their own rockets. And so therefore they're going to be basically punished by basically giving their money to their competitor to build more satellites that compete with them.
Yeah.
And so I think the market dynamics are going to even out here a little bit as more competitors come in, and the margins will change as well. Margins around launch will change as all of these new rockets come on the market.
Are you seeing anything like on the venture side? Are you watching that space at all?
There's a lot. Yeah, on the venture side, there is a lot. There's a lot of space station startups. There's a lot of communication startups. I bring up a lot Hubble Networks. So they do like Bluetooth. They want to do a Bluetooth constellation to connect devices, like from space to Bluetooth devices on the planet, which is a ridiculous capability.
I know my Bluetooth stops working when I go to the other room.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. On the venture side, I think, something like Impulse Space, they're creating these, basically think of it like as an extra stage to take satellites from one orbit to another orbit, and usually a high orbit, that will open up a new market for like medium and geostationary Earth orbit satellites, because it's going to make those orbits much more accessible because they can piggyback on any rocket, including the Falcon 9.
And so they just hop off?
They basically drop off this like what effectively amounts to an extra stage. It's just like a rocket with a thing to like hold a satellite who wants to set up, and then it's like they're super efficient rockets. The guy who runs that company and designs the engines there is the guy who designed the engines for SpaceX. So very good heritage there. But yeah, I think there's something called K2. They want to build large satellites. So the trend has been towards making smaller and smaller and cheaper satellites. But now that we get to getting to this point where the cost to launch is getting cheaper and cheaper, there's going to be these like bifurcated use cases. And so there's going to be some use cases where you just want to send the biggest satellite on.
So what's an example of like something that needs a huge satellite?
So, I mean, anything where you want like the cost of the thing itself just becomes larger than the cost of launch. So with launch costs dropping, that's going to happen quite naturally. And so, if you want, for example, something that does Earth observation from a high place, and you have this huge optic on it, you could spend like hundreds of millions of dollars or millions of dollars trying to optimize the weight of everything else, or you just pack with as much weight as possible, pay a little bit extra for launch, and then just launch it.
Oh, so basically putting like a massive like Hubble telescope just floating around.
I mean, potentially. I think there's other use cases. There's communication use cases as well at that orbit. But there's the ground is shifting in the industry, and so nobody knows like which way it's going to end up. So I think there's a lot. And on the venture side, there's a lot and with the $350 billion valuation of SpaceX, everybody like is seeing dollar signs. On top of that, Space Force's budget is bigger than NASA's now. They're going to be ordering a lot of satellites.
Oh, that'd be crazy.
Looking for a lot of capabilities, especially with adaptive space, like moving satellites from orbits so they can observe other satellites and things like that. So there's a lot happening in venture space right now for sure.
Do you think it's a good idea then to sit back and wait and see what happens, or should we be investing right now? Because it sounds like chaos. Honestly, sounds like there's a lot of companies, and how do you trust anything? But I know that space is going to be relevant forever. So,
yeah, I think there's like different ways to invest in it. So, for example, with something like the reason investors love Rocket Lab so much is because they're pretty broad across it, and so the rocket launchers gives them a good setup for launching their own satellites, which they plan to do as well. But they also do a lot of space systems stuff. So building satellites for other startups, like they built the bus for BARDA, which makes the space pharmaceuticals. So if manufacturing in space becomes a big thing, they're well positioned for that. They're going to be launching their own constellation. If constellations are a big thing, they're well positioned for that. There's they have done a good job of either building their own or acquiring companies that build these very critical systems across different space systems. That has, I think, provided them
they're reputable.
Just provided them good coverage for whichever way everything lands after it shifts, right?
Yeah. They're a diverse company.
Yeah, and the other thing that's good about them, at least based on what they're saying, is that when they acquire these companies, they manage to improve the scale. So they'll buy a company that's doing an N number of things, and usually the reason they buy these companies is because they're not able to produce enough parts for what they need. And so they'll just acquire them and scale it up and hopefully improve margins in the process. And that's why investors love them. That's why their stock has been doing great. And hopefully if they can keep it up, while adding Neutron to their it'll be a great company. Yeah.
All right. Well, stock to watch.
Stock to watch.
Just to watch.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.